Okay, good morning. Thank you for attending the How to Navigate Complexity with the Cynefin framework. Really happy to have you here. This is a really interesting topic shared by Ashley, Anna, and Derek today. This is an interactive webinar. There is this thing we're using called slido.com that's online, that was sent to you in the invite as well as is on the chat. Please sign on to Slido and ask your questions throughout, and keep your phones on mute as well. Your questions will be answered in the last 10 or 15 minutes, but for the most part, it is relatively interactive. A survey will be coming out 15 minutes before the end of the talk. Please fill it out. It really helps us know what to offer next and what you like and what you don't like. We want to make it better and better each time for you. That's all I have for you, so I'm going to leave it to Anna to start the webinar.
Amazing. Thank you so much, Ari, and thank you to the Exchange Lab for hosting us. Hello, everyone. My name is Anna McLean. I am the Director of Capacity Building at the Innovation Hub, and I am delighted to be with all of you here today for our session, How to Navigate Complexity with the Cynefin Framework. This tool is something that our team at the Innovation Hub has been exploring for quite a long time, but it feels like until very recently, that was quite a theoretical exploration. And then sometime around mid-March, our worlds got turned upside down, and this became very potent and very real. So we're thrilled to be able to share it with you all today. To open, I would like to acknowledge the territory that I'm calling in from today. So I live on the territories of the Wasanich Nations, the Sartlup, Sakem, Pakwachin, and Sayot First Nations. And since this whole COVID-19 thing started, I've been spending a lot of time outside in my yard. And I say gardening, but for most of the time it has been ripping out an incredible amount of invasive species: English ivy, holly, English bluebells, periwinkle. It's just endless. But what I've started to notice this past week is the camas growing up. And so for those of you who are from around these parts, you might be familiar with camas. It's a native species here. And every time I look out at it, it's a reminder to me of the power of resiliency. It's this little tiny flower. It's beautiful, and it's just telling me and all of us that we can push through all of these things that are trying to invade or trying to take over and change our landscape, and stay grounded in this little plant. So with that, we would love to hear where you're all joining from today. So we are going to dive into our first Slido. So if you haven't yet, please visit Slido using whatever browser you're most comfortable with. And the hashtag for all of our Slido polls today will be big picture thinking. So you should see a prompt to put that in. And then we'd love to hear from what territory you are joining us. So I'll just give folks a minute to pop over to Slido, get logged in, and then let us know, where are you calling from? And if there's anything you want to say about the place, anything that gives you resiliency or helps you feel connected to the land, then we would love to hear that. So as you're doing that, just a few other bits and pieces. I've got two of my colleagues along with me here today. They'll introduce themselves in a moment, but Derek Messelink and Ashley Dryberg, who will be guiding us through a lot of our content. And we are here to introduce the Cynefin framework. It's sort of a high-level introduction, and talk about the different domains of this framework and what it means when our problems that we're facing exist in different facets of that domain, how that can shift how we should be showing up and responding to those problems. So you'll have an opportunity to play with it a little bit. We will have one small group discussion, so we'll send you all into breakout groups and then bring you back to have some conversations with one another, and hopefully gain a little bit of familiarity with this tool. Otherwise, I have one very quick icebreaker for you all. So I'd like to invite you, this is a way to just warm up our brains a little bit, get the juices flowing. So I'd like to invite you, if it's comfortable in your body, to bring your hands up beside either side of your face. Don't worry, I won't make you do anything too embarrassing, but this is great. With your right hand, please make a point of your finger at the camera. I know it's very rude here, but point at the screen. With the other hand, make a thumbs up. With your left hand, make a thumbs up. Now, as quick as you can, switch. No guns allowed. And switch. and switch. I see some people just holding steady. Like, I got the first part. Switch, switch, no L's, no guns, switch, 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 switch. Yeah, very nice. I'm seeing some dance moves. This is really good. So what I've been told is this is actually getting the juices in our brains crossing from our left brain to our right brain. So if you're sleepy after lunch or early in the morning, it can get you going and wake you back up again. So just a little fun activity to share with you all. And with that, I will pass it over to Ashley to give us an introduction to the Cynefin framework. Ashley, you may be muted. I see you.
Hello, can you hear me now?
We can, absolutely.
Beautiful. There's always something that goes a little bit wrong on these things. Hi, everyone. My name is Ashley. I am calling today from Amiskwaciwâskahigan, which you might know as Edmonton. And clearly, as you can tell from behind me, I am moving. So if during my presentation you find your mind watering, I invite you to consider this beautiful stack of U-Haul boxes behind me as a visual distraction or perhaps aid, whatever is floating your boat today. Okay, let's dive into complexity. We hear the word complexity a lot. In my context, which is the BC Public Service, and I think many of you, although not all of you, also work for the BC Public Service, we talk about this word complexity all the time. If you open up Where Ideas Work, our corporate plan, you will see the word complex everywhere. We have complex challenges, we have complex problems, we're engaging in times of increasing complexity, but we don't often spend a lot of time unpacking and talking about, well, what the heck is complexity? What is a complex problem, and what do we do if we find ourselves in one? So we're going to tackle this a little bit today. And to start us off, I really love this image. For those of you that are unfamiliar, this is called Earthrise, and it was taken at the end of December in 1968 by the Apollo 8 mission. And it was, if I have my facts correct, I think one of the first images of the Earth taken by human beings from outside of the Earth. And I love this image in this context for two reasons. First of all, there's this really interesting psychological awakening that happens to astronauts when they see the Earth for the first time. Their whole perspective on the world literally changes, and they all talk about this, even folks that have been up quite recently. And there was also this kind of shift in understanding that happened for all humans that got to see this image for the first time. And this image reminds us that we are in a closed system, that we are in a massively complex system, but one that is closed. So everything is impacting everything else. And that is one of the first, most important lessons to remember when we are diving into complexity. Before we get there, though, it's important to do some groundwork and to think about complex problems in context to all sorts of other problems that we have. So we're going to start pretty simply with what are known as clear problems. Let's say it is a colleague's birthday and you have been tasked with baking a chocolate cake for this person and you have never made a chocolate cake before. What are you going to do? Hopefully, you are going to go to the internet or you're going to go to a cookbook and you're going to find a recipe. In other words, clear or simple problems have a straightforward solution to them already. You don't need to break. You don't need to reinvent the wheel here. Even if you have never made a cake before, you can input the ingredients that the recipe calls for, and hopefully the output is a cake. If you've never made a cake before, your first cake, it might be bad, but the more you do it, the better your cake is going to get. The 7th cake you make is probably going to be a little bit better. And this recipe is replicable across different contexts. 100 different people could follow the same recipe. And if it's a good recipe, you're probably going to have 100 similar-ish cakes. Another example of a clear problem could be renewing your driver's license. You know how to do this. It could be submitting your vacation and time on pay. These are clear problems with a straightforward set of best practices that we can follow. Next, there are complicated problems. The classic example here is building a rocket ship. When you're building a rocket ship, you know that formula are absolutely essential. Those formula are things like, and clearly I'm not a rocket scientist, so I'm making this up, but there are things like calculating the trajectory of the planets as they move relative to this rocket. There are things like what is the thrust that you need and how much fuel do you need to get that kind of thrust, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. But unlike baking a cake, there is no single person in the world that has all of the knowledge that they need to build a rocket ship, not even Elon Musk. It requires a huge pool of experts to bring their particular knowledge to bear. And because you have a large group of people working on this problem, there is an increasing amount of coordination that has to happen between everybody. The more rockets you launch, the more you're probably going to have success in the future. It's not necessarily guaranteed, but generally the more you do it, the better it's going to get. And though there is a high outcome of what a high certainty of what the outcome will be, the rocket will launch and go to the moon or the ISS, there might not necessarily, especially at the beginning, be agreement as to how to get there. Do we use a fusion engine or a different type of engine? Do we use this fuel as opposed to that fuel? The way that we get there originally is still uncertain, but where we're going is usually, we can imagine it. Another example might be building an intranet for your company. The outcome, we will have an intranet that all employees can access, is agreed upon. How we get there, how we build that intranet there might not be consensus. What kind of engine are we using? What kind of database management system are we using? What kind of contractors are we using? All of those questions might have a relative degree of uncertainty. Next, we have complex problems. Now, I'm going to talk directly to the parents in the room who have more than one kid. I'm going to guess when your second or third or fourth kid came along, you probably tried doing the same things, raising that second or subsequent child as you did with the first. And I'm also willing to bet that it probably did not work in the same way at all. Complex problems, formula have a very, very limited application. There is no set of best practices. There is no recipe here. Raising one child does not guarantee a future success. And in fact, there isn't agreement on what a successful outcome here is. What is successfully raising a child? Does that mean they're alive? Hopefully, we can all agree there, but does it mean that they are rich? Does it mean that they are kind? Does it mean that they are fluent in 6 languages? Does it mean that they are married? Does it mean that they have children? There's no agreement on what success looks like here. And while expertise can help a little, it has a limited application. If you go on the internet, on any parenting forum, it will take you 6 seconds to realize that everyone is an expert. Everyone has a different opinion. And in fact, everything you're doing is probably wrong, and you are going to continue to raise a child who will grow up to be a mass murderer. Relationships in complex problems are absolutely key. Every situation is unique, and you don't know what the outcome is going to be until we get there. You cannot predict in advance what is going to happen. We are awash in complex problems. Climate change is a complex problem. The opioid crisis is a complex problem. Our transition out of carbon-based energy is a complex problem. None of these things we can predict in advance. None of these things we've necessarily solved before. Building relationships with all of these things is going to be absolutely key in how we move forward. Almost lastly, second last C, we have chaotic problems, and we are all living through a chaotic problem right now, dealing with a pandemic. A chaotic problem is one that is novel, it is new, it is an experience that is rapidly unfolding and changing in real times. Experience might help, it might give you a set of guides, but it does not guarantee success. And I think we're seeing a really good example in Dr. Bonnie Henry. She has been through different kinds of pandemics before, but never one like this. And so her experience and her expertise is certainly helping, but it hasn't at any point guaranteed that we are going to be on top of this. Although we have been seeing some success, because the first thing you want to do in a chaotic problem is just stabilize the situation as much as possible. And a really good example we're seeing of this happening in real time is the federal government's response with things like SERB. They knew that these programs weren't perfect. They knew that there was going to be things that they missed, that there were going to be people that were taking advantage of it, and they said, push it out anyways, because the first thing we need to do is stabilize, stabilize, stabilize. And ultimately, with chaotic problems, the outcome is unknowable. We will not know, we cannot know what is going to happen. So if we put all of these pieces together, we get the Cynefin framework. Cynefin is a Welsh word. It means a multitude of habitats, which I believe is a beautiful metaphor here, developed by Dave Snowden. This is what it looks like. It looks kind of fun. If we put and map all of these pieces, all of these different types of problems onto this is what it looks like. We start in the middle with our fifth domain that I haven't mentioned yet, which is confused, which is where most of us start when we are dealing with a problem. We don't know what type of problem we are going to encounter until we can do some sense making and figure it out. So in the middle, we begin confused. Starting from the bottom left, we have our clear problems. We move up to our complicated problems. You will notice on the right-hand side, it says ordered. Clear and complicated problems are known as ordered problems because they are a little bit more predictable. There is some order behind them. There is some structure and some support that lends them. As we move to the left side of this framework, we find problems are becoming increasingly unordered. And this is where the complex and the chaotic problems live. If we mash all of these together, we have our 5 domains here. One other piece about this framework I want to point out to you just before I leave you. You'll notice at the bottom, there is this little shepherd's crook thing. This is called the cliff. And this reminds us that if we treat complex problems as if they were clear, we are going to tip into chaos. Beautiful example here is wildfires. We have a forest management policy and system that has really been suppressing natural fires for a while for lots of good reasons. However, because we've been suppressing those fires, we see things like the devastating wildfires that have been affecting BC for the past couple of years. And I would argue things like the pine beetle crisis. We have to make sure that when we are engaging with a problem, we know in which domain it exists and how to react to it properly. Because if we don't, the consequences can be catastrophic. All right, I'm going to pass it back to Anna.
Perfect. Thank you for that introduction, Ashley. I love every time I hear someone talk about the Cynefin framework, I learn a little bit more about it. So I'm appreciating how you mapped that out for us. So we are going to dive into our second Slido activity. So heading back to Slido, hashtag big picture thinking. We'd love you to think about a problem that you're facing. It could be at work, it could be in your personal life, it could be on a personal scale, local scale, national, global, whatever you feel like playing with a little bit. And as you think about that problem, consider the Cynefin framework and where would you place that problem on the framework? So is it in the confused domain? Is it very chaotic? Is it clear and straightforward and you know what to do? Does it have that sort of human element and it's very complex? Where would you place that? So I'll give you a moment to head over to Slido and give you some time to make a choice. You'll notice there's 2 other options there. So some problems, elements or facets of different problems exist in multiple domains. So if you're feeling like, oh, you know, like this part of my problem is feeling very clear and we've done this before, but there's these elements that are really complex about it. Feel free to let us know that it feels like it exists in multiple domains or there's another option. So if you're not seeing your answer there. So I'll just give you a few more moments. We've got about 20 of you responding so far, so and the number keeps ticking up. That's amazing. So we'll just give you a little bit more time and then we will reveal the results. And this is more just out of curiosity to get a sense where are many of the problems that you all are dealing with right now, where do they lie? Because that's sort of the first step of using this tool is understanding where your problem is. And then there are different ways that you can show up or step into leadership depending on which of these different domains you are at. Okay, I'm seeing the numbers start to slow down. I'm going to give folks 10 more seconds to make a choice. And then I will ask, oh, we got a couple more in there. Amazing. This is great. I should name that we're new to using these tools, so we're excited to be partnering with the lab to be able to try them out. So thank you all for experimenting alongside of us. Okay, Ari, let's close it down and see what we've got. Da, da, da. So if I go to polls, oh, I don't see the results. All right, okay. So for anyone that isn't in Slido, we can see we've got 39% in complex and 30 in multiple. So over 2/3 of our problems are lying in those spaces, and then an additional 24% in complicated. And then we've got a few in the clear, 3% in clear and 3% in confused. Nobody feeling chaotic today, so we've got our feet on the ground. We have some sort of pathway forward, but yeah, that's very interesting that lots in the complex and the complicated domains. If folks want to say anything in the chat, feel free. Use the chat as much as you can to communicate with amongst one another, but if anyone wants to just name why you placed your problem where you did, we'd love to hear out of curiosity. Perfect. We can close that one down, and I will hand it back over to Derek now, who is going to give us a deeper dive into all of the domains and then focus a bit more specifically into complexity. So it's great that so many folks named that's where your problem lies. That's where the emphasis of our next piece will be. So over to you, Derek.
Hello, folks. I'm Derek Masslink. I'm the Director of Innovation Methods with the Innovation Hub, and I'm calling in from Cynefin territory of the Hokomanem peoples. Really great that we're having this conversation, and really appreciate that folks recognize that a lot of what they're dealing with lies in both in the multiple domains or context, as well as in the complex context. So we're going to unpack this framework, which on the surface seems very straightforward. Looks like a 2x2 matrix. See, but if you talk to Dave Snowden, he cringes at that thought. This is a sense-making tool. This helps us kind of interrogate our situation so that we can make different choices, that we can make the appropriate choices. So we're going to start. And I'm going to look to Ashley. She's going to be handling me and making sure that I don't stray off course or take too much time. But we start off, as Ashley mentioned, in the state of confusion. This is like the state of unknowing, and we've got choices to make. So dropping down, if we look at if our context is clear, this used to be known as a simple domain or a simple context. This is the realm of best practice. This is something that us in government are very good at. An example of this, besides a recipe, would be driving. We drive here in Canada. We drive on the right-hand side of the road. That is best practice. Everybody understands that when you learn to drive. Your knowledge, it's very straightforward. It's common accepted practice. Nobody really challenges that, and if they do, they quickly learn. So in this situation, we sense, we categorize, we find a category in which this problem or what we're dealing with falls into, and then we respond accordingly according to approaches that we've already developed, and they're very clear and replicatable. If we move into the complicated context, in this context, this is the realm, as Ashley talked about, where we benefit from expert opinion, where there is a number of ways in which things can be done. They're difficult, we require, this is where we benefit from expert opinion. So in this situation, and these situations, we sense, analyze, so we're analyzing what's going on. We consult with expertise, a range of disciplines to determine the way in which we should respond accordingly. And there might be multiple ways. So this is the realm of good practice. There isn't kind of a codified way of doing things. There is a range of options that's available to us. And if we spend enough time and we employ the right people, we will come up with approaches that make sense. This is also something that we understand well here in government. When we move into the unordered domain, the realm of complexity, I'm just going to move my windows here so I can see. This is when this is kind of, things are new and emergent for a variety of the reasons that Ashley laid out. And in this situation, the appropriate response is actually to probe, to actually try things. We are probing the system, we're probing the situation to make sense of what might work. So we're in a kind of a learning mode so that we can develop approaches. We can then sort of select the approaches that are going to actually work and have traction. So we're in this learning approach. So the appropriate approach is to probe, sense, and then respond. And Dave talks about this now as this being the realm of exaptive practice. And using, again, our space theme, if for those of you who remember the movie Apollo 13, that they ran into troubles in orbit where I think it was their CO2 scrubber, or there was some problem with the spaceship where they had to go into the part of the spacecraft that was going to return to Earth. There was 3 of them. It could only accommodate 2 for any length of time, and they actually had to develop a way of actually taking out carbon dioxide out with the kind of tools that they had. So they repurposed, in combination with folks on the ground, they came up with an approach. They repurposed existing things that they had on board so that they could take carbon dioxide out of the spacecraft and would allow them to survive re-entry. So exaptive practice is repurposing things that we have on hand and applying them in a new and novel situation. In chaotic, when we drop into the chaotic, this is something that we're now experiencing. This is where we have no experience. And in this situation, as Ashley identified, this is when we take action immediately. We try to stabilize the situation so that then we can try to move that situation into the complex, into a more complex context, so that we can then respond accordingly. So in this situation, we act, sense, and respond. And this is the realm of novel practice. This is the realm of transformative innovations, where we're doing things that we've never done before because we're experiencing something that we've never experienced before. So a couple things to point out. So these, all 4 of these, a couple things to really to dive into is this idea of, and maybe if we move to the next slide, I think, Ashley, this difference between probing and acting. So in probing, we're actually trying to generate a response that we can then react to. We can develop we can understand what's happening, and we can take the appropriate measures. Acting is, we're just doing things. We're actually trying to, using the forest fire example, we're trying to throw water on the fire. We're trying to stabilize it so that we can then take appropriate measures. So we're seeing a lot of that right now. And we're actually seeing in the context of COVID, I think initially was a lot of reaction, trying to stabilize. And now, as we get further into the crisis, there's a learning, there's a more understanding that's being developed. So now people are actually trying things because they've got kind of some stability. We've kind of flattening the curve so that we can then take more of kind of a learning approach. Acceptation, I've talked about this repurposing, sort of bringing things that we've got in our toolbox. Another way of thinking of this, for those that may remember the television show MacGyver, this is kind of MacGyvering. We're taking things out of context and we're applying them in a new situation. They're things that are available to us, and we're trying to kind of adapt them to that, to the current situation, which is inappropriate. And then there's this real focus on learning while doing. Dave talks about this now as assessing, adapting, exapting, sort of, you know, bringing in sort of newer approaches, and then transcending is actually embedding these transformative innovations and bringing them into practice. So this is a really rich, it's sometimes hard to appreciate, but in the unowned domain is a really rich area for innovation. And we see a lot of things emerge that then can be embedded and become common practice. And what we're also trying to do is we're actually trying to shift our problem space into an ordered domain. So we have some more control, more stability. This is the area of comfort for human beings. So that this movement between them is really important. And as Ashley pointed out, that cliff, when we become complacent, and we've seen this again, COVID is a perfect example of this. Something you know, people have talked about this event being a black swan. This is not a black swan. This is a white swan. This is something we knew about. We didn't know exactly what it would look like, but pandemics are something that people have been concerned about for a long time. People like Bonnie Henry, because of the things that we're doing. And so we were going along business as usual, and we actually fell into a state of chaos because we were not paying attention, and we became complacent, and we weren't making the proper investments. And the costs can be catastrophic. So that warning, that cliff is a really important one, is that when we're operating in a simple domain, things that appear to us to be simple, we constantly have to ask the question, are they? And what's changing? So that's an important thing to pay attention to as well. And this framework is a way of interrogating what we're doing in the moment to make sure that we're not sort of pushing everything or treating everything the same. Next slide, Ashley. So what we would like to do now is spend some time in discussion. So, you know, I think for those of us at the Hub, you know, our focus has been innovation. And right now, we're all experiencing this. We're in a state of flux. And this is a period of profound learning. And so I think we have a lot to pay attention to. So what we would like you to do is spend some time together in small groups talking about what you're learning in this time of change. And also, what are the examples of exaptive innovations that you might already be seeing that are being applied within the context that you find yourself? Anna.
Perfect. Thanks so much, Derek. So I am just quickly making some breakout rooms. I imagine many of you have been spending lots of time on Zoom this past month, but if you have not experienced breakout rooms yet, what's going to happen in a moment is I will press a button and you will see something pop up in your screen that invites you to join a breakout group. Click that button and it will bring you into a new space. And then we are going to ask you to self-facilitate a conversation around what are you learning and are you seeing examples of exaptive innovations. You will have roughly 10 minutes. I will give you a 1-minute warning. So you will see something pop up in your little breakout rooms that starts a timer, a countdown clock, and gives you sort of 60 seconds and counts all the way down. At that 1 second, 0 second mark, you will automatically get pulled back into this room. So just a warning, it can be a bit abrupt. You will just get zapped back into this full group space. So yeah, if you have any questions, throw them in the chat if you run into any trouble getting into the breakout rooms. And also just before I send you off there, I'd love to encourage you, if any questions are popping up, either have already or do while you're in your breakout room, please throw them into the Q&A in Slido. and we will have a little bit of time at the end to respond to any questions that might have arisen for you. Okay, so with that, I am going to open all of the rooms, and we will see you back here in about 10 minutes. Enjoy. Hi, folks. I'm seeing a few people that are still here in the main room. Feel free to stay here and hang out. We're just sort of staying quiet while the conversation's happening. If you've run into any tech trouble joining your room, feel free to unmute yourself and let me know. Or otherwise, yeah, if you're just choosing to take a little break, that is absolutely fine with us. And welcome back, everybody. You're all zooming back into the main room. It's take a minute to ground yourself. I know the first time that happened to me, I was like, oh, here you go. Welcome back. So we hope you all had some interesting conversations. Apologies, right when I was setting up the breakout rooms, I think a bunch of people dropped off the call. So some of you were in rooms of 5 and some of you ended up in rooms of maybe 2. So hopefully the 2 of you had a great conversation and lots of space to process together. But yeah, it was just like right when they got set up, we lost a few folks who had to jump to other meetings. So what can you do? But I'm hearing from a few people in a couple different channels that the breakout chat was really great. We have about 12 minutes left together. So we do have time definitely for some questions. So if any questions has come up, feel free to jump over to Slido to the Q&A section and put any questions in there, and we're happy to respond to those. And otherwise, we would love to hear from a couple of people if there were any big insights that came through your conversations with one another, any real aha moments or things that feel like they've landed or are useful. So if anyone would like to share, we will ask you to unmute yourself. If you go to the participants list, you could might see a button to raise your hand. I'm not seeing it on mine, but otherwise, I don't think it's going to be a race to speak. So maybe someone can just speak up. Oh, and I'm just seeing a question in the chat. So from Angelique, I'm wondering if someone can explain a bit why the diagram is shaped the way it is. Why the curves? Why the green and gray portions? I missed the part about the hook. I know someone mentioned it. So Ashley or Derek, could one of you take that question?
You want me to
go for it?
Yeah, so yeah, great. I think the curves are there so that it isn't seen as a 2 by 2 matrix, that these aren't sort of distinct you know, contexts that have these hard lines. There's actually there are gray areas, and discerning between them, there's a bit of overlap. So it's I think to bring attention to that, and again, that little hook is to indicate that that is a cliff between the clear and the chaotic, that it is easy for that context to change rapidly, and when it changes rapidly, it can be catastrophic, like what we're seeing today. The other piece that I'll add that I forgot to mention, in the clear and the complicated, these are the domains of constraints. Like we have fixed constraints, or we have governing constraints, things that constrain what we do and that help us, like guide rails. In the complex and the chaotic, this is where we talk about enabling constraints. So what are the things that we can remove, or the kind of constraints that the light constraints that we can have in place that help us? In the chaotic, there is actually no constraints. We're scrambling to find constraints so that we can stabilize things. So that's an important element to understand as well.
Can I add just one small piece onto that, which is more of a trivia piece? The Cynefin framework is something that is constantly changing and evolving. This is certainly not the first iteration. I want to say 5th, but don't quote me on that. And this version of it is very, very new. It's only a few months old. So if you're looking on the internet for the Cynefin framework, you're going to see ones that look a little bit different. And I'm sure in another year or 2, there's going to be another iteration for it as well.
Yeah,
nice, great point. And there was a follow-up question on that. Are there any specific walkthrough tools?
Walkthrough, like examples, or?
Angelique, feel free to unmute if you want to give more specifics about that. I'm thinking, is it like to help people kind of questions that might help people identify where they are in the framework, but maybe you're thinking something a bit different?
Yeah, I guess what I was wondering, is it really as simple as you identify where you are in the framework, and then if you're like, say in the complex, you're like, okay, just as a group, you're like, okay, what are things that we've used in the past for other things, and how can we apply it to where we're at now? Or, things like this pandemic, where they're just like, okay, how can we contain it so that we can move it to the complex? Like, is it really that like that simple, or is there more like in like a deeper dive, in depth walkthrough?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think Dave came up with this, I think, to make it as simple, to the lowest threshold in order to help people make sense of the situation. That said, there's a lot of complexity behind it. And as you use the framework, I've been using the framework now for upward, I think close to a decade, and I'm still discovering aspects of it. And so is Dave and the folks at Cognitive Edge that are really focused on employing it in their activities. I would, anything that if you can find on Dave Snowden, he's got some really, really wonderful videos. He's got kind of a dry Welsh sense of humor, but you can tell that there's a lot behind it. And as well as I think it's the 2007 Harvard Business Review article that kind of lays out the framework. But it is a low threshold, easy way of engaging. It's supposed to be meant to be very accessible, and it's not kind of a categorization tool. It's a sense-making tool.
Perfect.
Thank
Thanks,
you.
Derek. Oh, go ahead.
Or I was just saying thanks for the explanation.
Amazing. Ashley or Derek, if you were able, I agree that Harvard Business Review article is really helpful in framing out the role of leaders. If one of you could throw that into the chat, amazing. That would be perfect. Thank you. So we are rounding the bend here, just wrapping up. So we have one more final Slido activity for you all. So if you can head back there and head to big picture thinking. We'd love to hear in one word, and I will accept hyphenated words if you must. What are you taking away from today's presentation? Whether it's a feeling, a new idea, a tool, whatever it might be. We're just curious. One word. Oh, you're going to see I did not update the Slido. It says, how are you feeling? But we'd actually love to hear what are you taking away from today's presentation. So feel free to throw any thoughts in there. And while you are doing that, I will let you know that we have just sort of opened a very large can of worms here with this presentation today. There's lots more to dig into. The Innovation Hub is here we love talking about Cynefin, we love talking about systems thinking, and how do we really understand and make sense not only of the organization that we work in, but the larger context that many public servants do their work in. And so if this stuff gets you excited, please reach out. And Ari will be sending around an evaluation survey to let us know how this session went for you. And there's an option there to let us know if you'd like to learn more about this area. So do you want to dig more into systems thinking, or building resilience in times of change or crisis, learning from crisis, or anything else that comes to mind. So please let us know what you'd like to learn more about. We're happy to keep creating resources and workshops that meet your needs. And otherwise, please reach out to us at any time. You can see we have an @work group for those of you who are internal to the BC Public Service. We have an email address for everyone, and unfortunately, we no longer have a fax. So too bad if you are still using that form of communication. Jen said, Jen is on the call, she's our team lead, and she said we never did. Fax for the hub never existed. Ari, could you make it so that I can see the responses? I'm seeing that a bunch of folks, amazing. So some of the words, curious, frameworks, exploration, resonant, intrigued, perspective, clarity, exaptive. Yeah, that new word, exaptive, that one's sticking with me a lot as well. How do I understand that? Rethinking problems, interested, tools, amazing. So thank you all for sharing in Slido, sharing in the chat, sharing with one another in the breakout rooms. Thank you for choosing to spend your time with us this morning. Thank you to, again, the Exchange Lab for inviting us in and partnering with us on this session. It's been a real joy working with Ari and his team on this. And again, please reach out. Let us know what else we can offer